Mark Carney has directed the Defense Ministry to review a $13.2 billion F-35 fighter jet deal signed with the U.S.
Very deliberate, prudent, looking at all factors, review on the F-35, the longer-term operating costs of those planes, and very importantly...
Why are we spending all this money on American-made fighter jets that are very expensive when we can get cheaper alternatives from companies like Saab in Sweden or Dassault in France?
A possibility to become a partner of what's called Rearm Europe.
What if I told you that America's closest ally just ripped billions of dollars in defense contracts out of Washington's hands and handed them to Europe, leaving the Pentagon humiliated and U.S. workers staring down layoffs? On September 1, 2025, Canada delivered a bombshell that has shaken the U.S. defense industry to its core, awarding next-generation fighter jet contracts not to Lockheed Martin or Boeing, but to a European coalition signaling that trust in Washington's economic reliability has snapped. The shock is enormous. For decades, American fighter jets like the F-16, F/A-18, and F-35 defined NATO power and guaranteed tens of thousands of U.S. jobs. Yet today, Ottawa announced that Canadian pilots will fly planes assembled in Montreal, powered by European engines and equipped with Asian electronics. Washington insiders confirmed the decision was a direct response to Trump's tariff war, which in the past year hit Canadian aluminum, steel, and aerospace components with penalties as high as 35%. Canadian Defense Minister Anita Anand stated, "We cannot base our sovereignty on supply chains vulnerable to political disruption. The economic impact is immediate." Analysts at RBC Capital Markets estimate that more than 20,000 direct U.S. aerospace jobs are now at risk, with secondary losses potentially double that once suppliers and contractors are included. In Fort Worth, home to thousands of Lockheed Martin workers, stunned employees gathered outside factory gates after hearing the news. "We built fighters for generations," said machinist John Ramirez, "and now we're being undercut by our closest ally." Local officials warned of ripple effects on property taxes and school budgets. The mayor of Fort Worth noted that every $1 billion in defense contracts supports nearly 6,000 local jobs. Losing Canada's orders could mean a contraction of up to $12 billion over the next decade. Small businesses are also reeling. Precision Tooling Incorporated, a family-run supplier in Wichita, Kansas that machines titanium parts for the F-35, reported that 40% of its forward orders were tied to Canadian procurement. Owner Sarah Miller told reporters, "This isn't just numbers on a page. That's 80 workers in my shop wondering how they'll pay mortgages." The U.S. Small Business Administration has long stressed that defense contracts sustain thousands of SMEs. Cutting them off threatens not only corporate giants, but entire local ecosystems. Local union leaders echoed the same fears, warning that the ripple effect will stretch far beyond the shop floor. In Wichita, Union Representative Mark O'Donnell explained that each aerospace job supports roughly 3 additional positions in transportation, catering, and retail. When the contracts vanish, it's not just machinists at risk, it's the diner waitress, the truck driver, and the daycare center, depending on steady paychecks. Small towns across Kansas and Missouri fear an exodus of skilled labor if layoffs continue, threatening to hollow out entire communities. Politicians across the spectrum are demanding answers. Missouri Senator Josh Hawley blasted the administration, saying, "How could we allow a NATO ally to walk away from decades of defense partnership without a plan in place?" Meanwhile, Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown pointed out the irony. Tariffs were supposed to protect jobs. Instead, they cost us jobs in aerospace and raised prices for consumers. The symbolism is devastating. America built its identity as the arsenal of democracy arming allies from World War II through the Cold War. Fighter jets were never just hardware. They were diplomacy, leverage, and prestige. Watching Canada openly walk away undermines U.S. confidence at home and sends a message abroad. Even close allies are ready to diversify if Washington becomes unpredictable. Economists are equally alarmed. The Peterson Institute for International Economics estimates that U.S. defense exports generated over $60 billion annually and supported 500,000 jobs across 45 states. Losing Canada's contracts alone could slash 5 to 10% from that figure. This is not just a procurement loss, warned analyst Douglas Irwin. It's a structural shift in how allies view the reliability of American supply chains. The Congressional Budget Office projected that reduced economies of scale could raise Pentagon costs per aircraft by up to 18%. That means U.S. taxpayers will foot higher bills for fewer jets. In Detroit, where aerospace and auto suppliers overlap, community leaders are bracing for fallout. "Our district is already struggling with inflation and high energy costs," said Michigan Congresswoman Debbie Dingell. The last thing we need is layoffs because Washington can't manage trade policy. Data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics show that Michigan alone hosts over 90 aerospace component firms tied to defense exports, many of them SMEs with fewer than 200 workers. Canadian officials insist the move was unavoidable. Prime Minister Mark Carney argued that reliance on U.S. defense suppliers had become a national liability. Trade wars cannot dictate our security, he declared in Ottawa. Canadian aerospace employs over 240,000 people nationwide and contributes $27 billion annually to GDP. By shifting procurement, Canada expects to create 10,000 new domestic jobs, many of them in Quebec's aviation corridor around Montreal. European leaders are celebrating. French President Emmanuel Macron praised the deal as a recognition that European defense industry can stand shoulder to shoulder with the best. Airbus executives hinted the contract could secure production lines well into the 2030s, while Sweden's Saab emphasized that Canada's decision proves smaller and ATO members can lead innovation. Yet for Washington, the timing could not be worse. With U.S. inflation hovering at 6.1% year over year and household debt surpassing $17 trillion, the loss of high-wage aerospace jobs compounds existing stress. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce warned last week that escalating tariff disputes could shave 0.8% off GDP growth in 2025. "We are not protecting American workers," said Chamber CEO Suzanne Clark. "We are pricing them out of global markets. SMEs are especially vulnerable." In a survey by the National Defense Industrial Association, 42% of small contractors said they could not survive more than 6 months without new orders. Many of these firms lack the financial buffer of giants like Boeing. Ahmed Khan, owner of a machine shop in Missouri, told reporters, "We already took hits from the steel tariffs. Now with Canada gone, 60% of our contracts are in jeopardy. I don't know how long we can hold on." The Pentagon itself appears blindsided. Insiders revealed that officials had expected routine negotiations with Ottawa, not a wholesale rejection. One defense analyst put it bluntly, "We didn't just lose business, we lost trust. That trust deficit is now rippling across NATO." Analysts warn that if Canada can integrate European fighters successfully, allies in Asia, such as Japan and South Korea, may reconsider their dependence on U.S. systems. The global defense market is watching closely. Countries like Poland and Australia, once reliable U.S. customers, are evaluating alternatives. A Bloomberg survey found that 58% of international defense procurement officials now view U.S. policy as high risk due to political volatility. European suppliers are already leveraging Canada's pivot in marketing campaigns, telling buyers, "If Ottawa trusts us, so can you." Beyond economics, the psychological blow is profound. For generations, Americans believed their defense industry was unrivaled. From the Wright brothers to the stealth bomber, U.S. innovation led the world. But Canada's defection cracks that narrative. As Georgetown professor Rosa Brooks noted, prestige is as important as capability. Once allies demonstrate they can thrive without U.S. systems, the aura of inevitability is gone. Ordinary Americans are beginning to feel the impact. In Missouri, a diner waitress told the Associated Press, "Half my customers work at the Boeing plant. If they lose shifts, I lose tips." In Texas, a school superintendent warned that reduced property tax revenue from aerospace facilities could slash budgets for already underfunded districts. These stories illustrate that trade wars do not just play out in boardrooms, they hit kitchens, classrooms, and communities. Meanwhile, markets are adjusting. Defense stocks fell sharply after Ottawa's announcement, with Lockheed Martin dropping 6% and Boeing 4% in morning trading. European aerospace indices, by contrast, gained 3% on optimism of new orders. Investors appear to be betting on a redistribution of defense demand away from the U.S. toward Europe and Asia. Strategically, the risks extend beyond lost jobs. U.S. military doctrine relies on interoperability, ensuring allies use compatible systems. Divergence undermines joint operations, making it harder to coordinate training, maintenance, and deployment. Former NATO Supreme Commander Admiral James Stavridis warned the glue that holds the alliance together is shared technology. If allies peel off collective defense frays. So, what comes next? Analysts see two scenarios. Washington could recalibrate, easing tariffs, stabilizing supply chains, and offering allies more predictable terms. That might slow the momentum of diversification, or it could double down on hardline trade rhetoric, accelerating the exodus. Canada's contracts are signed but will take years to implement, leaving a narrow window for U.S. diplomacy. The stakes are enormous. Aerospace remains one of the few U.S. industries with a consistent trade surplus. Losing even 10% of that market narrows America's fiscal space to fund its global military presence. Economists warn that fewer exports mean less revenue-reducing capacity to sustain the network of bases, fleets, and operations underpinning U.S. power projection. For Canada, the gamble is significant but calculated. By diversifying supply chains, Ottawa reduces vulnerability to Washington's political swings, but integrating European systems into NATO frameworks will be complex and costly. Critics inside Canada argue that long-term maintenance expenses could rise by 15 to 20% compared to U.S. options. Still, polling shows Canadians support the pivot. An Angus Reid survey released yesterday found 64% back the decision, citing national sovereignty and job creation. As September 2025 begins, the message is unmistakable. Canada's move is more than a procurement shift. It's a recalibration of global defense politics. America's dominance can no longer be taken for granted, and allies are willing to prove it. From Fort Worth to St. Louis, from Detroit to Seattle, families are bracing for the consequences. Unless Washington changes course, the jobs tariffs were meant to protect may become the very first casualties of a trade war gone wrong.
We must deter and fortify. Deter new aggression and fortify our shared defense. And we're working with urgency and determination to increase our defense capabilities to meet the threats.
What if I told you that Canada just delivered a blow so powerful on the world stage that it not only humiliated Donald Trump, but also shifted the balance of leadership in NATO overnight? On September 1, 2025, Prime Minister Mark Carney stood before Canadian troops at the Adazi military base in Latvia and declared that Canada will not only defend democracy, but lead the charge against authoritarian regimes.
Our shared defense.
His words sent shockwaves across Europe, embarrassed Washington, and left many asking, has Canada just replaced the United States as the true leader of the free world? At the NATO base, Carney's speech was more than symbolism. He said the days of tranquility are over. We now live in a world of brute force, and we must meet that force with greater force.
To rebuild, rearm, and reinvest in the Canadian Armed Forces.
Behind him stood hundreds of Canadian and allied troops from 14 nations representing a multinational brigade of 3,500 soldiers. Carney made clear that Canada will expand Operation Reassurance, extending its deployment in Latvia for another 3 years. The move comes with a pledge to quadruple defense spending, rising to 5% of GDP by 2035, an investment that will equal over $60 billion annually by the end of the decade. For comparison, Canada spent just $21 billion on defense a decade ago. Ordinary Canadians have noticed this dramatic shift. Sarah McDougall, owner of a small logistics firm in Ontario, told CBC News, "For years we relied on the United States to lead, but now it feels like we're standing on our own 2 feet. Our soldiers are respected abroad, and our government is finally making defense a priority." Her voice reflects a growing sentiment at home that Canada is no longer just a junior partner, but a nation ready to lead. Carney's words also carried historical weight. He reminded the audience that Canada was the first G7 nation to recognize Latvia's independence in 1991 after decades of Soviet occupation. He linked that decision to today's fight, pointing out that Canada has trained more than 45,000 Ukrainian soldiers through Operation Unifier since 2014. Ukrainians know that Canada and our allies stand with them, he said, as fresh reports confirmed Russia launched nearly 100 drone and missile attacks on Ukraine overnight, leaving 100,000 households without electricity. President Zelensky thanked Canada directly, posting on social media that Canadian solidarity has been a lifeline in our darkest hours. This is more than rhetoric, it is investment. Canada recently committed an additional $9 billion in defense modernization this year alone. That includes a new procurement agency to speed up delivery of drones, aircraft, and naval vessels.
Needed defense equipment, drones, ammunition, armored vehicles.
Carney announced that Canada is partnering with the European Union on the Rearm Europe plan, pooling resources to lower costs and accelerate production. "We cannot wait years to equip our forces," Carney said. "The threats are here now." EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen echoed his remarks, praising Canada's leadership. "Europe has found in Canada a partner we can trust when Washington hesitates." The contrast with Trump could not have been sharper. Just weeks earlier, Donald Trump stumbled through a controversial meeting in Alaska with Vladimir Putin, where Russian officials openly mocked the president. Instead of demanding accountability, Trump praised Putin as "my friend." The New York Times reported that senior Pentagon officials were shocked and embarrassed as images showed Trump appearing deferential to Russian envoys. Meanwhile, Canada's firm stance in Latvia drew praise from European media. Germany's Der Spiegel wrote Carney has become the voice of NATO's conscience, while France's Le Monde declared the leadership vacuum left by the United States has been filled by Canada. Business leaders also see the shift. A recent Angus Reid survey on August 28, 2025 found that 59% of Canadian SMEs support increased defense spending, believing it strengthens Canada's global influence and opens new trade partnerships. Michael Tan, who runs a small tech startup in Vancouver, explained when allies see Canada taking security seriously, they are more willing to sign trade deals with us. It's not just about tanks and planes, it's about credibility. The speech also tied directly into Canada's expanding economic strategy. Carney highlighted new energy and mineral export agreements with Europe and Asia designed to reduce reliance on the United States. In 2024, 97% of Canadian oil was exported to the U.S., but new contracts signed with Japan and South Korea are shifting billions in trade eastward. Canada's Trans Mountain pipeline expansion now allows 890,000 barrels per day to reach Pacific markets. We are not just defending democracy abroad, Carney said, we are securing prosperity at home. Meanwhile, Americans are feeling the fallout of Trump's erratic policies. Border crossings from Canada to North Dakota have plunged nearly 30% since July, devastating local businesses. We used to get 40% of our summer sales from Canadian tourists, said Jack Miller, owner of a family-run motel in Grand Forks. This year it is barely 10%. People don't want to deal with Trump's hostility. National statistics are equally grim. U.S. bankruptcies through August 2025 are already higher than the total of the past 2 years combined, according to the American Bankruptcy Institute. Treasury bond spreads have surged, signaling investor anxiety, and the dollar index fell 5% in August alone. Canadian politicians are seizing the moment. Foreign Minister Melanie Joly stated, "When the U.S. turns inward, we step forward. Canada will not retreat from its responsibilities." Opposition leaders, too, are uniting around this new direction. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, typically critical of Carney, admitted in Parliament last week, "While we debate domestic issues fiercely, there is no doubt Canada's military presence abroad sends a message of strength. Even NATO allies who once relied solely on Washington are recalibrating." Colonel Anders Holm of Denmark, stationed at Adazi, praised Canada's role. "Canadian leadership has been steady, reliable, and essential. They bring not just troops, but a sense of moral purpose." In Finland and Sweden, newspapers described Carney as the prime minister who speaks like a general. Latvia's own defense minister, Inara Murnies, noted, "The presence of Canadian troops here is a daily reminder that freedom is defended, not given." Economists are also pointing to measurable shifts. RBC Capital Markets estimates that Canada's defense industry will add 35,000 jobs over the next decade as procurement ramps up. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business reported that 42% of SMEs expect to benefit indirectly through supply contracts or logistics services. "We are already bidding on small contracts to provide parts and maintenance for NATO operations," said Ahmed Khan, owner of a machine shop in Mississauga. "For small firms like ours, this is the chance of a generation." By contrast, American SMEs are suffering. Farmers in Iowa complain that retaliatory tariffs from Canada and the EU have slashed soybean exports by 25% this summer. "We can't sell our crops, and Washington is silent," said farmer Rick Johnson. Meanwhile, Canada is signing new deals in Asia. "They're eating our lunch." The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has warned that Trump's tariffs could cost American consumers $200 billion in higher prices by year-end if current trends continue. The symbolism of Carney's speech, delivered not in Ottawa, but on NATO's Eastern Front, was deliberate. It underscored that Canada is not hiding behind others, but standing shoulder to shoulder with allies. "If we want a safer world, we need a stronger Canada," Carney said. His words were met with applause, not just from soldiers, but from European officials watching live. The BBC noted that Carney's rhetoric was statesmanlike, sober, and rooted in strategy, a clear contrast to Trump's chaotic improvisation. What happens next? Canada's defense budget for 2026 is already projected at $42 billion, a 20% increase from this year. Infrastructure projects are underway to build new Arctic bases, reinforcing sovereignty in the north as Russia increases activity there. Ottawa is also preparing to host a NATO summit in 2027, positioning Canada as a central player in the alliance's future. Analysts at the London School of Economics argue that Canada is reshaping the transatlantic security architecture, while Washington, mired in political gridlock, risks permanent marginalization. Back home, Canadians are rallying behind this new assertiveness. National pride is on the rise. A recent Abacus data poll found 68% of Canadians approve of Carney's handling of NATO relations, the highest support for a prime minister's foreign policy since 2001. Social media campaigns using hashtags like Stronger Canada and Led the Free World are trending nationwide. I used to think Canada was just America's little brother, said Montreal student Julien Lefebvre. Now I feel like we're finally respected. The economic dividends are already visible. The Canadian dollar strengthened 3% in August, even as the US dollar declined. Foreign direct investment into Canada rose 12% year over year, fueled by confidence in its political stability. Small business owners like Emily Wong, who runs a renewable energy firm in Calgary, are optimistic. Investors see Canada as a safe bet, she said. While the U.S. is unpredictable, Canada is dependable. The ultimate question remains, will Washington adapt or continue its decline? Trump's erratic diplomacy combined with trade wars and public humiliations has left America increasingly isolated. Meanwhile, Canada is cultivating alliances, investing in its military, and positioning itself as a guarantor of democratic stability. As Carney put it bluntly, this is a hinge moment in history. Canada's leadership will be measured not only by the strength of our values, but by the value of our strength. Analysts in Brussels also point out that Canada's actions have ripple effects far beyond NATO. According to the European Council on Foreign Relations, trade between Canada and the EU grew by 7.5% in the first half of 2025 alone, fueled by new energy and defense contracts. Small manufacturers in Germany and Poland say Canadian partnerships are helping them stabilize supply chains disrupted by U.S. unpredictability. Even Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida praised Canada's expanded role, calling it a cornerstone of global stability. These endorsements underscore a reality Washington can no longer ignore. Canada is no longer a quiet partner, it is becoming a global anchor. On this September 1, 2025, the world witnessed a historic turning point. A Canadian Prime Minister stood before troops in Latvia and declared that Canada would lead where the United States faltered. For millions watching, it was a reminder that leadership is not claimed by slogans, but earned through sacrifice, investment, and vision. Whether America can recover its role remains uncertain, but one thing is clear: Canada has already stepped into the spotlight, and the world is paying attention.